A psalm about someone like David today.
Welcome to Coffee with Creamer, where you get to sit down with our host, Dr. Barry Creamer, for a conversation about faith, life, and culture. We'll look at old ideas through a new lens, turn those culture wars on their head, and paint a picture of the way things could be. If you like your thinking deep and your coffee hot, pull up a chair. You're in the right place.
It is Psalm 101, which sounds a lot like Christianity 101, Our Faith 101, a college course, in the foundations of our faith. And it sort of is. It hits on a theme so central to Old Testament and New, and certainly the words of Jesus in the New Testament, that it really could be referred to as Christianity 101. And I will sort of move, not just freely, but deliberately, back and forth between this Old Testament, obviously Jewish passage, and claims that I'm making about Christianity, which obviously in Christ are the fulfillment of the things we learn in the Old Testament to begin with. So I will refer to it as Christianity 101 kind of stuff as I'm going through it. And I say a psalm about someone like David because as we're reading through this, and I'm not going to try to keep it a mystery, I think there are just so many similarities with both the vocabulary and the nature of the story about Job, that it just invites a comparison with his life. And I don't mean to imply by that in some way that Psalm 101 is written so that we will study the book of Job. But it's hard not to make the comparison once you've seen it, and I do think that's what you'll notice as I read through it as well. So what I want to do is read to you the text first. It's a short psalm, 8 verses, and then go back and take it in pieces, 4 different pieces, 2 verses each, but not 1 and 2 and then 3 and 4, not like that, but because for the first time in ages, I've finally come back to a psalm that is, and see, there are psalms like this scattered throughout, but it's been a long time since I've read one that was divided in half, like this one is, where the first half of the psalm and the second half of the psalm are just lined up with each other, verse by verse, so that we can make an easy comparison between the things that are happening in the first half of the psalm and the second half of the psalm. It's one of the ways that parallelism finds its way into the psalms, into this kind of poetry. And in the first verse and the fifth verse, because there are 8 verses, those are the 2 that would lead off their sections, it's not as obvious. So I'm just going to tell you from the beginning, you're going to think, well, why is he even dividing it in half like this? But from there on, verses 2 and 6 and 3 and 7 and 4 and 8, they line up precisely. I mean, the vocabulary is there. All the indicators are there to say you're supposed to look at these together in this way. So I want to read it to you as a whole and then go back and cover each of those pairs of verses and what I think it might be addressing about how we're supposed to live out our Christianity, the kind of attitude, demeanor we should bring in our worship of God and in our obedience to him and the way we worship him with our lives, in other words. So here it is, a psalm of David, who I will refer to as someone like Job. By the way, that's not an implication that this psalm is written in response to Job or that David would have been thinking of Job. There's no reason to think Job as a book is written before David is writing his psalm. It may be a story in their collective consciousness that they know. I don't know. But the indications, even just in the fact that we're talking about Sabaeans who come and destroy Job's family or take his livestock and so on, gives it a time frame around David's day, the book of Job, as a setting, but not as when it was written. So for all I know, Job is written with this psalm in mind, or vice versa. I don't know which way it goes. I just know it's hard to read the psalm without thinking of Job once you've thought of it. So here we start in verse 1. So a psalm of David, verse 1. I will sing of steadfast love and justice to you, O Lord. I will make music. I will ponder the way that is blameless. Oh, when will you come to me? I will walk with integrity of heart within my house. I will not set before my eyes anything that is worthless. I hate the work of those who fall away. It shall not cling to me. A perverse heart shall be far from me. I will know nothing of evil. Whoever slanders his neighbor secretly, I will destroy. Whoever has a haughty look and an arrogant heart, I will not endure. I will look with favor on the faithful in the land, that they may dwell with me. He who walks in the way that is blameless shall minister to me. No one who practices deceit shall dwell in my house. No one who utters lies shall continue before my eyes. Morning by morning, I will destroy all the wicked in the land, cutting off all the evildoers from the city of the Lord. Well, there's a nice imprecatory closing to a psalm, right? So a good cursed closing to a psalm. I'm going to cut off all the evildoers from the city of the Lord. And it's particularly interesting, by the way, this imprecation, when you compare it with, something like Jeremiah in Lamentations. He renews his mercies every morning. Morning by morning his mercies are new. We sing in Great is Thy Faithfulness. And in this verse, it's a little different, right? Morning by morning his mercies are new. Well, equally, morning by morning I will destroy all the wicked in the land. The funny thing is, normally, and I just mean by normally the way I do it, but in my encounters with other people, I think we think of it similarly. We do think, oh, God's mercies are new every morning, but then we need to tack on this hard reality that's going to follow everything of judgment, and he's also still going to judge people. But I think actually we should probably look at that in the opposite direction. There is judgment that's renewed every morning, but there's also something else that's renewed every morning. And I'm not just throwing that in because I prefer mercy to judgments, not just a preference. As we read through this psalm in the context of someone like David, which is also someone like Job, which is also someone like Joseph or Abraham, or almost any heroic character from the Old Testament, they all follow the same pattern. But as we look at their lives, the one lesson we're taught over and over again is quite the opposite of what we might expect to carry out of a psalm of imprecation like this, a psalm of judgments and curses like this. And so I just want to make sure we carry out of it what we should. And let me just be clearer than that. I don't just want to turn the psalm into something of a blessing or an offer of mercy instead of curses because I feel like, talking about mercy instead of curses. I don't want to do that. What I want to do is invite us, instead of pointing our fingers outward and saying, oh, good, those wicked people are finally going to be judged. I want to look at all the fingers that are pointed at us and telling us, if there is a judgment coming, and there is, if there is a judgment coming, what might bring it to us? What might put us in the shoes of those who would fear the coming of God rather than look forward to it? Or, even worse, those who would look forward to the coming of God, only in the words of the minor prophet, to realize that it wasn't such a great day for us after all. So I want us to do what Christians ought to do better than anybody else, which is examine ourselves to see if we're prepared for what God expects of us when he comes back to examine us. So here's where I would begin. I'm going to start I'm going to go through this psalm, again, 2 verses at a time, but doing both halves of the psalm at the same time, verses 1 through 4, and then verses 5 through 8. So we're going to do verses 1 and 5 together, not because I think that's how we have to read the psalm, but because I think to understand the themes in the psalm, if this is just the way parallelism works, if we put the parallels next to each other, we should be able to stumble upon some of the things that are supposed to be observed as we go through it. So here, the first step we'll take. Verse 1, I will sing of steadfast love and justice to you, O Lord, I will make music. So I will sing of steadfast love and justice. To you, O Lord, I will make music. So I'm going to lift up this transcendent form of art to you, God, because of your steadfast love and justice. That's verse 1. Verse 5, whoever slanders his neighbor secretly. And again, I'll confess from the beginning, if you started me with verses 1 and 5, I would not put them together automatically. But because of what comes in the following verses, I sort of have to. So we're just going to run at it by faith here for a minute. And then starting in the second verse, I think it'll make a lot more sense. But here on this part, verse 5, he adds, whoever slanders his neighbor secretly, I will destroy. Whoever has a haughty look and an arrogant heart, I will not endure. So how on earth would those two go together? Well, let's just take the first verse and make sure that we understand what it said. I have something I'm going to worship God about. I'm going to worship him about his justice, the pronouncements he has made about what is right for us to do and ought to do. So his justice, but paired with his justice is his hesed. We've talked about the word many times, his covenantal love, his steadfast love, as it's translated here in the ESV. Sometimes in the King James, it's translated as tender mercies. It is his faithful love. It's translated his mercies in general. It's translated a lot of different ways, all to get at this point. And this is the point of our worship as well. We worship God in the context of a psalm like this, especially, it's obviously stated, not just because he's righteous, but because he's made a covenant with us that he keeps. And the reason hesed, his faithfulness in that covenant, is so squishy in its relationship with mercy. There is a different word that we can use for mercy in the Old Testament, but this word is often translated as having to do with his tender mercies or steadfast love. There's another word for love in the Old Testament. Why is this always put in this context? Because if a righteous God is going to keep a covenant with his people, and this is not speculative, you just read the book, and this is the point of his relationship with his people. If God is going to have a faithful relationship with his people, it is inherently going to be because he has mercy on them, because he is constantly forgiving them. He is a righteous God, and every day we wake up, we violate his righteousness, and yet he's made a commitment to be faithful to us. So if he is faithful at all, it is because he is merciful. The two topics, if you treated them independently, justice and mercy, if you treated them independently, would be contrasting characteristics. But when you put them together into a covenant with God's people, they're intrinsically intertwined. They can't be separated. For God to be righteous and have a relationship with unrighteous people means he's merciful. It's just built into the nature of the relationship because we have a God who chooses to be in a covenant with us, who chooses to invite us into his home. So what do? I respond by saying, this is better than things in the world. I need to make music about this. So I will sing of steadfast love and justice. To you, O Lord, I will make music. Then the contrast. And you will notice as you go through the psalm, the first half of the psalm is about the things we celebrate because of what we have with God, including that he separates us from evil. So that's all good. But the last half of the psalm is almost entirely about God's judgment of those who are wicked and the rejection of them by the psalmist himself. And so in verse 5, we would expect something negative to come out of this and its exclusion from the covenant. So here I am, I'm included in the covenant. What do I have to celebrate? Just one thing, that God is merciful to me despite his righteousness. He is righteous and therefore has mercy on me so that I can stay in his covenant. How do I think about somebody who's excluded from the covenant? What is it that they are wrong about? In verse 5, it is this: whoever slanders his neighbor, I will destroy. It's not a random act of evil. This is slandering your neighbor. I mean, we all know, look, we all have neighbors that are great, and we all have neighbors who, don't do things right. They put little doggy bags in the bottom of our trash can when they should have put it in a full bag, not to be too specific about it. They don't water their yard at the right time, or they don't park their car in the right place, or whatever aggravates us. None of those things aggravates me, by the way. I'm just picking things I'm sure would aggravate others. The point is, we all know what it means to have a neighbor who doesn't measure up to the standard we have set for them. And if we choose not to be like God, then we slander them. Oh, have you seen that neighbor? I mean, they're not measuring up to the standard I've set. That's the contrast with Yahweh and what he's done for us. And so whoever has, instead of a look of mercy, a haughty look and an arrogant heart, I will not endure. The slandering neighbor doesn't have steadfast love for his neighbor. The great commandment, by the way. A great commandment because we're so likely not to keep it. Love your neighbor as yourself. I'm going to slander my neighbor. So you don't love your neighbor. You're not in covenant with them and keeping the relationship with them that God's been willing to keep with you. And therefore his judgment, and this is judgment, I will not endure, doesn't just mean I get tired of them. It means they're not going to stay in the land with me. I'm going to expel them. That's the idea. I'm going to extrude them from the land and from myself. That's what's being said in the psalm. And as surprising as it might sound, because he didn't choose all the horrible, terrible violations of morality that we choose as the most important, the things that make it easiest for us to put a scarlet A on somebody's chest. He instead puts this one thing, slandering your neighbor. Why aren't we putting S's on the neighbor? Yeah, did you hear what so-and-so? Oh, we're going to have to get a scarlet S for you. You don't qualify as a righteous person anymore. We just overlook the stuff that God here says he's going to use as the measure of judgment for extruding people from the land. And I realize he's saying this through his psalmist, through David. In this case, he's saying who gets excluded from the covenant. That's the point. Why are they excluded? Because they slandered their neighbor. That's all they did, but that's not all it means. It means instead of having mercy, instead of replicating the mercy God had on us, the thing that we worship God for, we slander them. We just don't put up with them. And it shouldn't surprise, first of all, it shouldn't surprise us that we're so good at doing that, at slandering them, at rejecting, at taking the person that we're supposed to love and despising them instead, having a haughty attitude or an arrogant heart. It's built into our nature. There are very few things more satisfying in the world than letting bitterness just sit on you against somebody you really don't like. You know what I'm talking about. And if you have a long-term relationship, everybody who's married knows what this means. You can have a fight with your spouse and know that you're going to make up, know that it's going to be fine, know that it's not even important, and literally be willing to say to them, you're just going to have to talk to me later. Because what you're saying is, I need to sit in this anger for a little while. It's going to take me a minute to let it boil off. And that doesn't just mean I'm so hot I need to let my nerves unfray. It means I want to enjoy this anger for a little bit. I want to be able to take it out on somebody for a little bit. We're good at that. We would prefer to slander our neighbor, and we're so good at it and so comfortable with it that we forget the cost of it. And it's not a mysterious cost. It's not like it's hidden from us. In Jesus' own words in the New Testament, in the Sermon on the Mount, in the passage where he teaches us how we're supposed to pray, tells us how to give our alms, and then he tells us how to pray, and then he tells us how to fast, in Matthew 6. And when he does that about prayer, he pauses in it and actually gives the model prayer, the Lord's Prayer. And as he gives the model prayer that the Lord offered, when you pray like this, our Father who art in heaven. When he concluded that prayer, a prayer which included, and forgive us our debts as we forgive those who are indebted to us, right? That was in the middle of the prayer. When he concludes the prayer, he doesn't say, because if you will pray this way, your Father will hear you. He doesn't say anything about prayer. Instead, as I've pointed out in the past, he says, if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But get this, if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. Now, let's just stop explaining it away for a minute, trying to figure out how it means something other than that, because that sounds like, our measure of righteousness before God and whether we would be judged or not is actually based on something about what we do. Instead of trying to explain it away and say, well, that doesn't really matter, why don't we just take it at face value for a minute and see it for what it says? If you have mercy on others, your heavenly Father is going to have mercy on you. And if you don't, then your Father is not going to have mercy on you. Now, I wouldn't, I don't even know why we're surprised that he would say that in Matthew 6. In Matthew 5, at the beginning of the same sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, at the very beginning, the part that's most famous, the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." That's what they receive. And on the positive side, and this is how I think it's given for us to understand it to begin with, on the positive side, we take that appropriately simply to mean when you have mercy on someone, you're giving something up because you needed to have mercy on them. The fact is they didn't deserve the mercy you had on them. There would be something more satisfying to you if you didn't have mercy on them, but you chose to have mercy on them. If a person deserves mercy, they don't need it. This is the point. So mercy goes to people who don't deserve it. So where would the blessing be for the person who's being merciful? Not that you are merciful. The blessing is that you shall receive mercy. And I think the generic idea, and if you follow it in the Beatitudes in general, this is the first half of those Beatitudes is all about this. The general idea is, yeah, you're giving up something now. You're having mercy instead of getting retribution. But you'll receive something that's worth that in the future because you yourself will receive mercy when you need it. And that's true. On the positive side, I think we're supposed to recognize that. But on the negative side, what Jesus brings out in Matthew 6 makes it pretty clear that he's also saying, if you expect to receive mercy, you better be demonstrating mercy. And I think that goes, obviously it does go, in the other direction chronologically to say, you have received mercy. I'm having mercy on you. How on earth could you not turn around and give that mercy to someone else? You say, they don't deserve it? You didn't deserve it. So I expect you to be like me toward them. That's what this whole idea of mercy is about in the way we live as Christians. Christ doesn't come into the world pronouncing the judgment that we deserve on us. He comes into the world not to condemn the world, but to give them mercy. And then he says, be like me. Give mercy. So in the first section about this, in Christianity 101, Psalm 101, I'd be saying Christianity is about mercy. It's what we celebrate. It's why we sing to God. You are a righteous God, and yet you keep your covenant with me. You're merciful. So I understand that whoever you're going to extrude from the covenant is going to be a person who doesn't have mercy because they received it from you and then they just hold it. That is not what you expect or asked for. So Christianity is about mercy. Now, I want to pause here and give you something to think about because the Beatitudes have come up, Matthew 5. And for the first time, because as I read through the psalm, for the obvious reasons, the use of the word blameless, I'm going to pursue the things that are blameless. I will not have anything evil in my house. I will put it away from me, and I'm not going to set any wicked thing before my eyes. All these phrases from the book of Job, are just begging for us to think about Job as we're reading through this psalm. For that reason, I read through the whole book of Job before I started really understanding what this psalm was about. I just read through it as a story. And it helps, when you hear the whole thing, and I listened to it, when you hear the whole thing in one sitting, and you get the interaction between Job and his friends and what Job's friends fail to do, and then even Elihu fails to do, that God himself brings in an answer in the end. And the answer is a little different from what we think. Now, to do all of that, I'm going to have to do a whole different episode, and maybe we'll do an episode on Job upcoming. But the thing that happened was after I did that, I'm looking at these statements about mercy and how the people who are extruded are the people who don't have mercy. I'm looking at the Beatitudes, and then I read the Beatitudes just after having gone through the whole book of Job. And I can't think of anyone the Beatitudes fit better than Job. So in order to prepare for the rest of the psalm, I just want to read you the Beatitudes real quickly and ask you to think about the things you know of Job, the suffering that he goes through, the faithfulness that he has with his mouth. Beginning and end of the book, God says repeatedly, he never sinned with his lips. And he complains plenty, by the way. So, he doesn't even want to be born. There are times when he talks about everything negative, but he never sins with his lips. This is according to God himself on the evaluation of what comes up with Job. So as you think about, and his friends just excoriating him, persecuting him, while he's sitting there suffering. So all of that's going on with Job. Think about all of that in the light of what these Beatitudes say. And then, obviously, the reward that Job receives at the end of the book. So here are the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Almost literal words from Job, by the way. For they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, something repeatedly said about Job, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. I read all of that, and hopefully you have in your mind, his friends mocking him, saying that they're defending God. Oh, God is righteous. And they say all good things about God, and then blame Job for his suffering. In all of that, Job is perfectly reflected in what the Beatitudes say. Okay, so with Job in the back of our minds, I want to take it a step at a time and talk through the rest of the psalm, starting in verse 2. And the premise on talking about verses 2 and 6 here, those are the two verses that will go together, is just that we're best, Christians are best, when we are judging ourselves. That's what we ought to do. That's not what we're best at. We're best at judging everyone else. But what we ought to be best at is judging ourselves. You know the verses, so I'll share those in a moment. And you can see this in verse 2 with the idea that the concern we should have is about our own integrity. Am I walking blameless? Am I being the person God wants me to be? So our faithfulness should be about our faithfulness, our integrity. So in verse 2, he says, the psalmist, David, I will ponder the way that is blameless. Oh, when will you come to me? I will walk with integrity of heart within my house. And again, if you haven't thought through Job in a while, the very first verse of Job is, and it uses the same word for blameless, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. We'll come back to the other expressions later, but that blamelessness is a characteristic of Job. And by the way, as you're reading through verse 2, I will ponder the way that is blameless. Okay, so there's blameless. When will you come to me? He says repeatedly, oh, that my judge would come. Oh, that God would appear before me. Oh, that he would allow me to come into his courtroom and make my case. And by the way, another thing that would require a completely different episode to finally make sense of is that God does give him his day in court. God allows him to stand in the courtroom. God says, here I am. Stand up like a man and defend yourself now. You wanted a day in court? I'll give you a day in court. Why would God do that? Why would he give him his day in court? Again, for another episode. But here, back to Psalm 101. I will walk with integrity of heart within my house. Job says that repeatedly. I will not turn away from the integrity, which is, by the way, very closely related to the word blameless that's used earlier in Job 1 and also in verse 2 here of Psalm 101. So I will walk with integrity of heart within my house. It is about how he's living within his own obedience to God. That's what verse 2 is about. I'm going to walk in the way that is blameless. I'm going to look at the integrity of my own walk within my own house. That's where I need to be. It's Matthew 7:1. Don't judge everybody else. Judge yourself. It's the whole idea in the first 12 verses of Matthew 7. Don't go applying judgments to someone else until you have first looked at your own heart and figured out what needs to be judged in there. What we do with everyone else in judging them is avoid the very thing we're supposed to provide for them, which is the mercy God has on us, and then expects us to walk with that mercy towards everyone else. So in verse 2, the idea is our faithfulness is about our faithfulness. It's about us having integrity. But the other half of the psalm, the last half of the psalm, those who are eventually going to be excluded, starts with a statement about who gets to be included. And inclusion in the fellowship The psalmist is saying, I have the integrity that says I'm looking at the blamelessness of my own life. This is what blamelessness is about. This is what my life should look like. So I'm going to walk integrity in my own house. He has said that much. Now he's saying, who else can be in this house? Who else gets to be included? And inclusion into the fellowship is having trust in that integrity, in that blamelessness. So literally the word comes up again. So in verse 2, it was, I'm going to ponder the way that is blameless. I'm looking at my own integrity. In verse 6, it is, I'm going to look with favor on the faithful in the land so that they can dwell with me, and he who walks in the way that is blameless will be able to serve in my house. As this man of the land is able to declare, those who live in our house, those who are included in this place will be the ones who are righteous, not the ones who are pursuing the slandering or the evil. And so in Job 27, the expression that he gives to his friends, this is at the conclusion of all the debating. You know, if you remember the book of Job, 3 times his friends speak one at a time, and Job answers each of them. So there's like 8 interactions. The last one doesn't speak a third time. So it's, Eliphaz and then Bildad and then Zophar, and Zophar only speaks twice, but everybody else speaks 3 times. And every time Job's answering them, when they all get through their speeches, Job has a long discourse before Elihu comes on the scene in chapter 32. And at the beginning of that discourse, he says, far be it from me, Job says to his friends who are there cursing him, far be it from me to say that you are right. Until I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. He's not only saying it about his own integrity, he's saying it about them. I'm not going to pretend that you're righteous when you're not. There's something wrong with what you're doing. And there's nothing wrong with what they're doing in the ways that we tend to judge people. They're not doing anything wrong in terms of some kind of impropriety with his finances or taking his money, lying to him about, something or another. They're not doing any of that. They're advocating, in their minds, I'm putting air quotes up, for God, that Job is wicked. They're sitting with their suffering friend, telling him how much more miserable he ought to be. They're not having mercy on him. That's the thing they failed to do throughout the entire story of Job. And Job says to them, far be it from me to declare that you are right. Until I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. So the idea here is that we're best as the people of God when we're not trying to point our finger at everyone else and tell them what they're doing wrong, but are instead looking at ourselves and telling us what we're doing wrong. That's what we're supposed to be doing. I'm not righteous, and therefore I need to correct things. I need to walk in integrity, and I'm not going to sacrifice it for anything. That's where my judgment ought to be, looking at me, myself. Christians judge best when they judge themselves. All right, third part of this psalm, looking at verse 3, and then its comparison verse 7. So in this one, and remember, all the psalms are in the mouth of the Messiah. He's praying them. The people of God, Israel, the Son of God, as they're referred to in Exodus, they're praying this psalm. And because the Messiah prays it, and then we're in the Messiah, we can pray it along with him. And only for that reason, that's why the righteous claims of this psalmist apply to us. Not because we're so righteous, but because we're in him. So we all know that. So in the mouth of the Messiah, I'm going to put this, and here's God's judgment. He is going to judge, but God's judgment is about how we treat other people. That's what it always comes down to. God's judgment is always about how we're treating other people. And the Messiah, the person who's in the covenant, he's pure. So in verse 3, he says, I will not set before my eyes anything that is worthless. I hate the work of those who fall away. It shall not cling to me. So all of that impurity I'm going to put aside from me. Now, we all know this language. I will not set before my eyes anything that is vain or worthless or an idol. There are all these different ways to take the concept that's given there. It's fine. We know the language because we also know how it comes out in Job 31. We quote this all the time. We only quote it in one specific context, though. In Job 31, it says, I have made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin? And we put that in a good context, in a responsible way to say, so don't get involved with porn and don't be lusting after people. And you've made a covenant with your eyes, so don't look in the inappropriate way at somebody like that. And Job does do that. He says, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to gaze at a virgin. Every man in the world knows what that means. I'm not going to gaze at someone to use them sexually the way that he could. But his statement doesn't stop there. This is the very last chapter where Job's giving an answer. After this, he's done. Elihu speaks, and then God himself shows up in a whirlwind and speaks. And the only other thing Job ever says is, I've said enough. I'm going to cover my mouth. I don't have any answers to give here. This is the conclusion of the matter, and for the whole chapter, he introduces it with this same idea. I'm not going to set before my eyes anything that is worthless. And he starts with that. He starts with a virgin, but he doesn't stay there. Listen to what he says in verse 13. If I have rejected the cause, he goes through this whole list of violations he could make of this idea. If I have rejected the cause of my manservant or my maidservant when they brought a complaint against me, what then should I do when God rises up? When he makes inquiry, what would I answer him? Did not he who made me in the womb also make him? And didn't one fashion both of us in the womb? His point is to say, I don't get to look with covetousness on anyone else, to just use them or take their stuff to my advantage and not consider them as being equal with me. Look what he says at the very end of that chapter. I have looked at the sun when it shone. If, he says, if I have looked at the sun when it shone, or the moon moving in splendor, and my heart has been secretly enticed, and my mouth has kissed my own hand, then this also would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges, for I would have been false to God above. His point is, I'm not going to look idolatrously on other things in the world as if they're here to be my possession. That I can take a person, in this case a virgin in verse 1, who is entrusted to me, a maidservant most likely in this case, they're entrusted to me, and then just use them for myself. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to abuse. He names in this chapter all of them. I'm not going to abuse orphans or strangers or widows. I'm not going to do that, because how would I answer God who created me and them? How would I answer to God when he shows up to see if I have been to others the way he has been to me? And that's why in verse 7, the contrasting passage, the curse side of the passage, what he says is, no one who practices deceit shall dwell in my house. No one who utters lies shall continue before my eyes. And this is the point in Job as well. In the Psalm, he doesn't pick random violations. He picks deception, lying. I'm using other people. I'm claiming things that aren't even the case so that I can get what I want, regardless of what it means for those people. In Job 13, his response to one of the accusations that's raised against him is this, as these godless people who are claiming to represent God bring curses to him, he says, this will be my salvation, that the godless shall not come before him. And so he says to his friends that are sitting there with him, withdraw your hand far from me, and let not the dread of you be something else that's terrifying me. That's a really strong statement to his friends, and he's not wrong. He's saying to his friends, look, I need mercy. I need help. And all you're bringing is more judgment. So let's just get this done with. God doesn't accept that, and I'm not going to accept that. Withdraw your hand from me, and don't let the one thing that's making me even more miserable be the fact that you're sitting here pronouncing judgment on me. So the end of the psalm then comes in verses 4 and 8, obviously. In verse 4, and this is, a sure way. This is, I'll put the two verses together and just say this to you. A sure way to be excluded from God's house is just to treat other people badly. So how does this come out in verse 4? A perverse heart shall be far from me. I will, David says in the psalm, Job says plenty of times in the book of Job, I will know nothing of evil. Job's way of saying it is, the author of the book of Job is to say that Job turned away from evil. Here, David says, I will know nothing of evil. What does that mean? That the Messiah's house is going to be filled with goodness. And that goodness means faithfulness, which means mercy. There's no way around it. The Messiah's house is going to be filled with the merciful. And again, it's not like I have to figure out some path to get there. Jesus says it repeatedly. If you forgive others, your Father in heaven will forgive you. If you do not forgive others, neither will your Father who is in heaven forgive you. Let's not explain it away. I understand salvation is entirely by grace through the forgiveness of God in the act of Christ, his Son on the cross. I understand all of that. But are you going to use that to explain away what Jesus himself, who dies for you on a cross, says you're supposed to understand of what he expects in your obedience to him as the one who had mercy on you, that you would have mercy on others? I mean, we just can't ignore what it says. And so Job says, a perverse heart shall be far from me. I will know nothing of evil. And in the end of the psalm, in verse 8, he says, morning by morning. Yeah, and again, what all of us expect in this is God's mercies will be renewed. Even the beginning of the psalm, that's what he's singing about. I'm worshiping God not just because he's just, but because he has steadfast love and he is just. He has mercy and he is just. And so the Messiah's house being filled with the merciful is represented in this statement, morning by morning, I will destroy all the wicked in the land, cutting off all the evildoers from the city of the Lord. Now, if I take that the way I prefer to take it, I just point my hands out at the wickedness in the world, the people who steal and the people who are committing acts of atrocities around the world, and I say that's who he's going to exclude. But if I read the Bible the way he gave it to me, then I look at myself and I say, why would I be the wicked that he wants to cut off from the land? What would make us like the evildoers that need to be extruded from the city of God? And in this imprecatory psalm, it is a psalm of curses. In this imprecatory psalm, the reminder is mostly that I don't want to be like those who are cursed, meaning not that I need to judge them, but that I need to learn from their judgment, which is their judgmentalism, and they're being judged in it. That's what I need to learn. When I'm reading it in the book of Job, the men who are cursed they didn't say a single negative word about God. They purport to be representing God, and they do a fair job of it. It's so convincing that very often you will hear people go back and quote Bildad or Eliphaz as if what they're saying does represent the thing we want to say about God. It's that good. And yet they constantly blame Job for his own suffering. And what they receive from God is not a minor correction. Well, you weren't quite right about Job. I mean, I appreciate you standing up for me, because I need people, to represent me. I'm certainly not capable of doing that myself. Recognize sarcasm when you hear it. No, God doesn't give them a gentle rebuke. This is what he said. And the Lord had after the Lord had spoken these words to Job. This is in Job 42. The Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my anger burns against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now, therefore, take 7 bulls and 7 rams, and what, just go to the priest and offer a sacrifice? No. And go to my servant Job, and offer up a burnt offering for yourselves, and my servant Job shall pray for you. The one you said was the cause of his own suffering. He'll pray for you. And maybe you'll learn the one thing you didn't bring to the conversation, because the friend you have been mocking, the one you've been saying brought about his own suffering, he's the only one who's going to practice in this entire story the thing that you should have been practicing, which is having mercy on your friends, mercy on the people who are wrong. My servant Job, he will pray for you, because I will accept his prayer, not to deal with you according to your folly. Do you hear that statement? This is the thing. You deserve to be judged. But he's going to have mercy on you by praying for you. He's going to stand in the gap and bring about your redemption when you don't deserve it. You practiced folly. You deserve justice. but you're going to receive mercy. My servant Job, who has mercy, is in my house because he's demonstrating the mercy that you didn't have. And because you're going to receive this mercy at his hand, I will accept you as well. I will accept his prayer not to deal with you according to your folly. For you have not spoken to me what is right, as my servant Job has. So Eliphaz the Temanite, in the ultimate act of humility, and Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, they went and they did what the Lord had told them, and the Lord accepted Job's prayer. The question we have to ask is not who God should judge, but whether we are ready to be judged on this basis. How much of the mercy God gave you have you given away? And have you given it to someone who deserved it as little as you did? That is indeed the question he expects us to answer.
Thanks for joining us for Coffee with Creamer. Your cup of coffee may be finished, but we are not. Come back next week for a refill as we sit down to examine a new set of ideas and cultural issues. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or visit our website at barrycreamer.com. Until next time, keep your mug hot and your mind sharp.